Hi, everybody. Thank you for coming to our talk about site restoration. Pretty excited. My name is Allaire Diamond, and I'm the Ecology and Restoration Program Director with Vermont Land Trust. A big part of our statewide restoration work is dam removals, culvert replacements, water quality and flood resilience work, but a lot of it turns into those couple types of projects. So really excited to be here. And we're here today with Jordan Duffy, who's not Evan Fitzgerald. Evan is sick, unfortunately. He came down with something last night. So Jordan's from Fitzgerald Environmental. We work closely together on projects. Do you want to introduce your?
Sure. Yeah, I'm a water resource engineer. Again, for Fitzgerald Environmental. I've got experience dam removal design, structure design, culverts. So yeah, it works well. Allaire and I have worked on a few projects, and I was able to jump in last minute for Evan. So we haven't done quite the same amount of coordination we would normally do on the presentation. So just bear with us.
It's going to be good. So this is really fun because it's fun the way that the day has been structured, of like all the different levels of how you go about conceptualizing a project, how you bid, how you do all these things. And I think the piece that we want to focus on here is that when we're removing a dam or a barrier or replacing a culvert, it's not just that you're doing that sort of like physical, like breaking apart concrete and removing earth. You're actually trying to recreate a natural system. And so with site restoration, it's like, how do we do that? What are the elements that we're trying to recreate? First of all, what's the vision there? And then what are like the specific ways that we try to do that? So when we were conceptualizing this talk, we were thinking through, well, actually, before I get into that, let's go back here. The three elements that we're going to be talking about are topography of the site. We'll talk about natural structure and roughness, and then we'll talk about plants. And so those are the three pieces that when you think about like doing a practical work, that helps to recreate a natural, ecologically functional system versus just pulling out a bunch of concrete and letting water kind of flow where it's going to go. So I think we've seen a couple really great graphics today, and here's another one from American Rivers that's just showing the same system in a degraded state and in a more ecologically functional state. It's kind of like, why are we doing this? So the degraded system, you see that stream, it's kind of looks like it's been straightened. There's some kind of head cutting potentially happening. It's in a broad valley, but the stream is incising. It's not able to access its floodplain. When there is a flood, the water's going to move really quickly. There's going to be a lot of erosion out of the system, rather than staying in the system and moving around and being distributed there, but it's just going to be gone. Water table is low. I really like how it shows this this kind of like dry soil underneath, this little cross section. And there's not really any wetlands around. It's just kind of flowing through like a dry, flat plain. And I think that Jesus earlier in his talk down in the engineering track was talking about something called shifting baseline, where, a lot of us in Vermont, we look at a system like this and maybe it has a dam in it and this valley is full of water and there's like a dam right here. And we think, let's just take out the dam and then it'll be the natural system again. And I think what's important to remember and to understand is that that's not a natural system. Even without a dam there, even without a man-made dam, this system is pretty degraded, and it for a lot of reasons, like hundreds of years of settlement and history and trapping beavers and floods and deforestation in the hills and all of this. So we want to restore an ecologically functional system. And so this bottom image is kind of getting a little more at that. The stream it's sinuous, it's moving around. It doesn't really show that it's multiple thread or multiple channel, but maybe there's a little bit of that right here. It's not as incised. It's just able to access its floodplain. You can imagine if floodwaters were to come through here, water would be getting out. This is more of a wetland, more wetland margins. There's more diversity of vegetation. The plant communities, more diverse. And there's more connection with groundwater and infiltration, and also access to groundwater from the surrounding aquifers. So this is kind of what we're going for, a functional system. So when I think about a dam removal project as a project manager for our program at Vermont Land Trust, I think about how do we do that through a set of design decisions that then translate into construction practices. And this is just a picture of kind of that last graphic. This is like a real life example of it. This is from Idaho. I think this is really beautiful. This is from a paper about beavers and the impact that they have. But this valley really shows it's a beaver influenced wetland system. The valley has had a lot of, there's a recent wildfire which burned kind of all the surrounding hills. That's why they look all kind of brown and gray. But the fire just skipped right over that valley bottom because of the water that was there. And so when you have a functional wetland stream system with all of those features that I was just describing, you have wetlands. It's not, again, that last picture, I think one thing that we often think about in Vermont is like, oh, like we're going to take out dams, so we're just going to free the rivers. I think that's even what like the slogan is, Karina. Free the rivers, but we actually don't necessarily want those rivers to just be like rushing, or the streams to be rushing away with no impediments. Systems like this, where those streams are flowing through wetland systems, maybe beaver influenced and all of that, especially high in the headwaters, are really important. So site restoration, the three elements of site restoration that we incorporate into our projects. And I should say at Vermont Land Trust, we work a lot on like privately owned dams on private land. It's just where our conservation easements are. So they're small, tend to be small streams, a little different than some of the bigger river projects that we've been hearing about today. Although we could work on those if we were able to, but just the nature of the site control that we have at Vermont Land Trust, we're working on small streams. But I think the elements are the same no matter the size of the system. Those three elements are, like I said, valley and stream topography. Why do we care about that? The topography of that system. The hydrologic system that we're restoring, we want it to extend across the entire river valley. So it's not just the channel, but it's gravel bars, it's flood benches, it's terraces that are accessed at times of higher water. There's maybe meander wetlands and other features of that riparian system that go across the whole valley, not just the channel. We care about in-stream structure and roughness as another element of site restoration. Why do we care about that? So this is just like the wood and the rocks and the roots of plants that are in that system, slowing down water, stabilizing the bed. And then again, the third thing, plants. So those provide habitat, they provide biodiversity, stabilize sediment. And this is super simplified. There's a lot more that could be said about this. In-stream structure also provides habitat and diversity of pools and riffles and places for macroinvertebrates to be and so forth. But just like as a general concept, I really like this idea of, the broad shape of the valley, the structure of the pieces in the valley, and then the living plants that are growing within that structure. So we're going to now go through those three things, and I'm going to turn this over to Jordan to talk about valley and stream topography, and I'll jump in here and there with specifics.
Cool. So kind of following up on what you said and what we've kind of heard throughout this whole day is the setting, right? The valley stream topography of what we're looking at, the reference reach of what we're trying to get back to really dictates what our design should be and what we want it to look like at the end. So I'm sure most people have seen a similar graphic to this, but looking at what our bank full width is, what our low flow channel is, and trying to design for that, that's where the water is going to be, but also design for bigger picture river corridor. Where's the river going to be during larger floods? Where the floodwater is going to be? How are we going to dissipate that energy to keep our system intact during larger flood events? And then at a bigger scale, which we've been unfortunately seeing a lot of in the last few years, what is the 100-year floodplain? What are the largest extents of where we would expect to see this water? So taking this into context as we look at our various designs is really important to know what we're trying to strive for at the end product. So we've got a couple design examples that we're going to kind of just walk through with this lens of what is our topography, what is our setting. So this first one is the Button Dam removal in Colchester. And as Allaire kind of mentioned, these are all smaller scale removals, so we can kind of focus a little bit more on different alternatives that aren't just, taking the dam out and letting it go, but actually putting back a system that we think will match the upstream reach and our restored reach that we're trying to accomplish here.
I'll just jump in and say that this is a project, it's also, the stream is called Crooked Creek, so sometimes we'll refer to it as Crooked Creek. This is on a piece of land that's owned and conserved by Vermont Land Trust, and the dam in question was built in the 50s, is a farm pond. So it's a very small headwater stream, an earthen dam.
Yeah, so pretty small drainage area. I think it was
70 acres.
Yeah. So I think we've even seen this channel dry upstream after. Yeah. So looking at this, or I'll step back. So again, looking at the landscape here, what we tried to do here, looking at the red up here, would be, this is our valley width, and this is kind of our target of how wide we would expect it to be. And then from the impoundment of where this pond was, you could see that the valley width was over widened. So, and then it kind of narrows back down as we move downstream. So as we move through and think about our restored system, we want to get back down to that kind of what that stream wants to be in terms of that narrower valley width that isn't so over widened due to the man-made impediment of the dam. So that's what those kind of lines are representing. So this is just an example of a picture of it before restoration and before removal, and that's the earthen dam on the far side. And then getting back to the reference reach or the analog channel. So looking upstream, again, fairly small drainage area. This was about a 3% valley slope, which was actually a little steeper than you would have expected to see for this type of setting. But with what we were seeing is about a 30-foot wide valley width. And that's, again, that sort of, this red here, this width up here was where our analog channel and that reference reach was. So 30 feet wide or so. Multi-thread channel, lots of wood, lots of roughness elements. So we wanted to recreate that in our restoration. So looking now at the design plans, we tried to recreate that 30 or so foot width throughout. And for this project, we actually used stage 0 approach. So we didn't define a single thread channel, which in this case would have been a 2 to 3 foot bankfull channel. But instead we allowed it to go over this 30-foot width and allowed the channel to move around and do what it wanted to over time. So now, to account for the full impoundment, we had all of these other areas around the outside. And in the blue shade here, we actually graded in some pocket pools for additional habitat and like wetland pools that filled up over time. Frogs have been loving it, and the fish are enjoying it. Sorry, not the fish, the birds have been enjoying it and getting all of everything. So yeah, so kind of using our full footprint to create as much biodiversity and habitat as possible. So this is probably the most telling image here. Again, looking at this kind of cross section of what our 30-foot wide restoration kind of channel, stage 0 channel would be, and then utilizing roughness elements throughout, using both stone and wood, and then kind of a walkthrough of construction here to here. So in the upper left, we have, the excavator is pretty much, after the pond was lowered, just starting to set that base grade of what our 30-foot channel, 30-foot wide channel width would be, and then getting those target grades. And then you can see we're starting to actually add in some roughness elements. We used a lot of wood. Allaire is going to talk more about how that wood was harvested and how it was installed. And then, as you can see, this was probably a year or so later. We've got a big flood event came and kind of overtook this full 30-foot wide valley and stayed stable, even though it was on a 3% grade, and still kind of held up to those same characteristics that you would see in the reference reach upstream. So again, looking at the same design plan, but in profile, we actually did quite a bit of grade control. So with this, those grade controls were valley spanning logs, and you can see them a little bit better here, but each of those log structures spanned the full 30-foot width and tied into both of the valley walls, if you will. So looking at those in profile, that's really what set our grade. And that's what, the contractor, we had a grade set for each of these, as you could see, and the contractor was able to use their laser levels to shoot those grades exactly to get that 3% grade that we wanted. And then just looking at, again, this was where the existing dam was and the existing water level. So changing settings slightly to kind of a larger drainage area and a slightly steeper reach. I think this was a little, maybe 0.8 square miles, still less than a square mile. I think this actually had a bankfull reference of maybe 8 to 10 feet. So again, looking at the topographic setting of this, we knew that even though there was a dam there, we were gonna end up removing it and putting in a single thread channel. So let me orient myself here. So this was also, we were dealing with some infrastructure. So this is a house here, and we had a channel that came through here, and kind of an impounded area, and then an existing crossing and a road into then this pool, which initially used as a swimming pool, I think.
Well, it's actually, yeah, it's fun to share the story. So this is in Dorset in the headwaters of the Otter Creek, up by like Emerald Lake State Park. And this dam actually had been in the site since like 1833, like maybe not the exact same dam, but we had to do a bunch of archaeological and historic review. And so it's pretty interesting to think about it being built there as a mill pond. That many years ago, yeah, then it had been maintained as like a place for fish. Fish were stocked there and for swimming and so forth. But yeah, as Jordan said, that one that's sort of in the center, it actually functioned as a second dam. So both of these projects had sort of two elements. The other one also had a culvert replacement on a farm road. So yeah, it really was kind of like a two-stage dam removal, although they were both pretty small. And then yeah, this one was literally like 15 feet from a house that was occupied.
So there's some interesting infrastructure here of kind of pipes that were feeding into this dam, but then there was also a bypass pipe that was shooting past the entire kind of impounded dam, and then there was a large stacked stone dam essentially that held it all together. So here's kind of a view of that concrete, and then again, kind of just downstream of that, there was another kind of stacked stone feature that kind of added to it. This was nice because we had a lot of stone on site that we used for the restoration for the roughness elements. So looking at this, we knew we kind of were in an interesting scenario where we had a lot of different changes in slope. You know, just downstream of us was a pretty good stable drop where you could kind of see it here. And then we had our stone dam, and then this is our access road here. So kind of zooming in and thinking about what our restoration would look like, you know, again, trying to match this transition zone, looking at slopes varying from 1.2 up to 4% to then where we're tying in where we get even steeper. So not just setting one straight grade, but kind of getting a little more complicated. And then also providing access. So this was designed to also have a ford crossing, so the landowner could still cross the stream and access some of the fields on the far side of the stream once we took out that initial roadway crossing that was there. So this again used roughness elements, but we also used more E-stone, and kind of wanted to hold that channel bed in place and prevent any down cutting. So a lot of stone was installed below the channel to help shape that channel. And in addition, the house was there, so we needed to make sure there wasn't too much vertical or horizontal adjustment.
Yeah, and just thinking about kind of the concept here of site restoration, the dam was really this critical kind of transition between this really like flat kind of forested wetland area upstream and this, just like you saw in that profile, really steep drop that was just a bedrock ledge downstream. So the design challenge here was to think about how are we going to design. We want to design a stream. This is a stream, and with some floodplain benches and so forth. But it's not going to look exactly like the reference reach upstream or downstream because it really is in that transition zone. So there was a lot of thinking about kind of how are we going to create a natural stream that's just starting to be a little steeper than upstream right before it goes over this ledge.
So yeah, just a quick look at the design plan. So again, with the house kind of situated right here, we designed a single thread channel throughout the reach with flood benches on either side. And then this was where our kind of ford crossing was. Oh no, sorry. This is where the ford crossing was. And then we, again, used wood as stabilizing structures, but these wood weren't used valley spanning like in the last one, but this was more of stabilizing the bank and adding roughness elements on those flood benches. Kind of trying to slow down the water, particularly, again, holding this bank in place, making sure that we don't move anywhere or migrate towards the house at all. Yeah, so.
Yeah, so that's our first concept, is just like the big picture. Like, what is the valley going to look like? What do we think about it from a cross-sectional perspective? What is it going to look like upstream to downstream? And how is that going to tie in to create an ecologically functional system? And so then, we've been referring to these pieces of in-stream and also like system-wide structure and roughness, not just in the stream, but also on the flood benches and so forth. So we're going to talk a little bit more about specifically some of the strategies we use to create in-stream structure and roughness. So Jordan's, I think, going to share some specifics around how he and his team create design typicals for that. And then I'll talk a little bit about the strategies of how we actually implement that on the ground, like where are we getting that material? And I wish we could have gotten all the like 5,000 trees that you were talking about in the last presentation, because we sometimes are like, we need trees, where are we gonna get them? So yeah, do you wanna get into the?
Yeah, sure. So this is just kind of like overall a few examples of some typicals that we put on projects, but with the channel being in the middle of all of these, are we using these structures to hold our grade vertically and using it as a grade control structure? So sometimes, rock weirs or wooden grade control structures are used, and that's when we really don't want that bed to lower. And then other times we use them just as roughness elements. So for this as an example, the flow is kind of going straight just over stone that we would be installing, or native stone, and then kind of up here on these flood benches, that's where we're really trying to add some of these additional structures, both for roughness, slowing down floodwaters, but also creating some habitat within the stream, just by having these root wads stick out. And then looking at this one where we're actually using stone to hold that grade, and all of the water flows right over that, and that's kind of more of a grade control that isn't going to change over time. So, and again, these are just shown in cross-section. Both of these have an example of kind of putting stone or wood over on those flood benches too. Looking at these systems, we are trying to naturalize them as much as possible. And as good as vegetation is, it's nice to have various features, whether they be stone or wood, just to, again, try to mimic and recreate those natural systems.
Which I love to think about those natural stream systems as being super messy. Like if you were in a really like an old growth forest and there was a stream, it would be really difficult to like make your way. You couldn't just wander along it. It would be messy, you'd be climbing, you'd be ducking, you'd be getting stuck. And so that's kind of what we're trying to create a little bit with this.
Yeah, we like our messy streams.
Yes.
So.
Which is why it's fun working with contractors who are like interested in doing that. Like I think sometimes I know like your clients are like, I want this like the neatest. With other types of projects, like really neat, really clean, really even. With these kind of projects, it's like messy. Although it's interesting with what you were just describing with the grade control piece, whether it's with wood or stone, like you want that to be really specific, and you're going to shoot levels and that. And then when it's other pieces, it's like, okay, just like place things in a more organic way or a more random way, so it has more of that kind of natural function and structure.
Yeah, and I like what you had said, Ben, of, this is the fun part, putting it back together where you can take some of your skill, but also some artistic creativity to make it look pretty still, So this is just an example of another project. This is the UVM horticultural farm dam removal, and this happened this past year. And this has a good example, and you can see kind of here and here, these are another example of those kind of valley spanning wood structures. So again, holding grade with those, but then here in the middle, this is just a floodplain roughness element. So, to tell the contractor, hey, put that piece of wood right there and bury it. And they're like, what do you mean? What do you want me to do? I just bury it halfway and, not shoot a grade on it, not do anything specific. So, this was an interesting one because the contractor hadn't done a lot of this, and they were looking for very specifics on, what is the radius of these turns and all of that. And, I was out there kind of shooting, little spray paint marks and just saying, hey, this is where you want to put it back because we're expecting this channel to move over time, kind of going back to what I think Laura was talking about, but we didn't do the full Roskin, meander belt width on this. We did it to check our assumptions and know where we're at, but this is going to be a wild system that will move and change and adjust over time. So it's interesting to see the contractor's mindset change as you kind of get that point across to them.
Jordan, who was the contractor for
That was SD Ireland. There was a box culvert at the far end of this, and they were really comfortable installing the box culvert. And then when they got into this, they asked a few more questions. But there was also a lot of sediment removal, and they did a great job with that as well, just having the resources and having all the equipment. So.
And I think just like in the last presentation, like that communication, good relationship communication, respect is just really important, because there's like, these projects are, they're just like their own unique thing, and there's like different parts of them that require more or less kind of fine-tunedness.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and for both of the first two projects we talked about, either someone from our company or you were there just about every day.
Yeah.
Yep. So same kind of relationship of being on site, working with each other and the contractor, and being able to kind of talk about whatever needed to change or specifics on the plans.
Yep.
So I'll hand it back over to you.
Yeah, so just a couple more like pictures. This is the Button Dam, the Crooked Creek one in Colchester, and just showing sort of so you see where these paired dark things are. These are the root wads of those channel spanning wood grade controls. So they're every 30 feet or so. There's one, there's two. I think there's one right there. And then otherwise, there's a bunch of other just like random wood. So I'll talk a little bit about like where we got the wood from. And we got it from on site. But the log dimensions were pretty specific. And then whatever was left, the tops of those trees and other branches were kind of just placed randomly. And that's what your plan specified, like a certain volume of pieces of wood placed at a certain distance here and there, but it was not super prescribed. So yeah, the wood, so this land, again, Vermont Land Trust owns this land. One of our foresters came out, marked certain trees to be pulled. It's obviously the transporting, and I'd love to hear like from folks from contractors in the room of like strategies that you have, because for me, there's just like a design challenge here of like moving wood with the root wads attached is just like really awkward and big, and like how do you do it? You can't just stack the logs on a truck. What we've done on the two projects where we've done this work is we've just gotten the wood from on site, so it just has to, the excavator can just move it over, and the chainsawing and the processing can happen right there. You can see this piece just being moved. I don't know if he even had to like drive anywhere. I think he just rotated the arm, picked up the tree, moved it over to the stream site. And that was great, but you can't always do that. So, or, this is a landowner, private landowner who agreed that these trees could go. You have to like really think about where that wood is coming from. So this is just like a big problem that I am curious about. I know that I've talked with Michelle Braun from Friends of the Winooski and others after the floods, and there's wood like this that gets washed up and people don't want it. Can we get it to places where we do want it? Like, it's just like an interesting problem that I would love to like have more collaboration about in our state. We've tried. I mean, there's a lot of people who are very interested in making that work, but it's just fundamentally hard because of the awkwardness of the material. Moving those pieces, these have been processed into the right length. I think they were 20 feet long each, right? So the stream width or the valley width was 30 feet. Each piece was 20. There was some overlap in the middle, and then they were dug into the walls on either side. This is from the Button site. The trees had been pulled really from just like right over here, the edge of this field, and stacked here while we were waiting for the project to start, and then moved over to the site to be placed in and to create those grade controls. And then just talking really quickly about the other kinds of roughness elements, like those other random branches and rocks and things. So different ways that this can happen. This is a plan of the UVM horticultural farm, where you can see like these little circles and shapes are specific trees, shrubs, rocks, and they were specifically placed in certain spots. And I didn't work on this project, but I think Evan had told me that there was a reason for that. There was a desire for those things to be in those places. And that may be the case with some projects, depending on a variety of factors. This is the Button project again, the planting plan for that project. And it's hard to see here, but there's just kind of like little X's throughout this, the blue system, which is the stream valley. Those X's are just kind of like suggestions, like put a tree or a rock or a roughness element roughly every, I think, 10 or 12 feet. So that was the plan there. And it's actually, we don't actually want them perfectly spaced out. We want them kind of random. And then, this picture I think was I think Evan had put these in.
This was, again, just talking more about like kind of roughness and grade control. This is just a rock weir that was installed on a larger river, the Millbrook, down in West Windsor. So this was actually in junction with the dam removal, but there was some infrastructure, and you can see here on this left side, this was a dry hydrant for the West Windsor Tower Fire Hall right there. So the fire department needed to keep that infrastructure, and that's why the original dam was there, but they were experiencing a lot of flooding, and the dam was raising that water surface elevation behind it, which was flooding them out worse. So kind of in junction with removal of that dam, we wanted to hold grade. So this is just another example of another, harder grade control structure that was installed, but having more infrastructure right next to it, it was kind of more necessary to have that varying approach of keeping that in place and knowing it was going to stay in place.
Another type of natural roughness is like process-based, what I call process-based restoration. Beaver dam analogs, post-assisted log structures. These structures have a bunch of different names. There's a growing group of us folks in Vermont who are doing this. I want that group to expand. I'd love it to include more folks in this room who can offer this as a service and understand sort of the techniques around it. So the Utah State University came up with this this great pocket field guide that's like $10 or $12. It's free as a PDF online. So I would recommend just taking a look. Low-tech process-based restoration of riverscapes. And it's basically jumping from the idea of the way that beavers work in river systems, where if you have a bunch of functioning beaver dams, you're having wetlands, you're having multi-thread channels, you're having these really functional stream valleys. Obviously, that's in certain settings that's really appropriate. In other places, it's not going to work in like the main stem of big rivers. But you can jumpstart that process by building beaver dam analogs, and then over time, those drive greater sinuosity. They drive floodplain access. Sediment is moving through in a different way. There's actually groundwater can be accessed there as well. And beavers can actually sometimes be attracted to these places if there's an appropriate site for that, if they're not going to be damaging someone's yard or something like that. It's great to actually invite beavers there because they will continue to maintain those systems for free 24/7 rather than having to have us come out and like get our machines and work there. So I'm always trying to think about like, is this an appropriate place for beavers? Could beavers recolonize here if they're not there already? And if so, what can we do to jumpstart that? So building beaver dam analogs or post-assisted log structures is a way to add structure to a system with wood and mud and rocks, because beavers use all that too, to help to restore the site. And this is just a couple examples of these structures in Vermont. This picture on the left is some just very, very small beaver dam analogs that we built in a really, this was like something that I was doing while the contractors were working in a different part of the site. Built probably 10 or 12 of these in the stream. They were able to catch some of the fine sediment that was coming down from the project, and they were, like creating just a little more structure, pooling. Just pretty interesting to see how they worked even immediately. Those were just like built out of branches that were left over from the wood that was put into the stream to create those, to define the stream channel, the grade controls. And then up here, these pictures are just really Vermont Land Trust staff and volunteers, another contractor that we've worked with to build beaver dam analogs at the Button project in Colchester. So there's a lot of different techniques for this. There's like some that work really well, some that don't work well. There's a lot of evolving thinking around it. Stay tuned for more of this if you're not already tapped into it. I'm hoping that we'll see more of this in coming years, and it's going to be integrated into projects at a greater level. Okay, so last section of our site restoration talk is just about plants. And so you create the valley system that's going to support a natural stream and wetland system. You add the physical roughness elements, sort of like dead wood and rocks, mostly. And then you have living plants that are growing on top. And so I really love this picture. This is from the Simpson Dam. On the left, you see the way that the contractors broke out that project is, if you remember, there was like the downstream dam, the sort of upstream like crossing, which functioned as a dam. And so there was sort of downstream river left, downstream river right, upstream river left, upstream river right. So they basically restored each of those four quadrants in order. And so this is the first downstream river right area that's basically done. And now they've moved on over here, and you can see there's still elements of like concrete in that pipe that were part of the project. So they worked over here intensively, finished it, then went over here and did that, and then they went upstream. I thought that was a really interesting and great approach. This is Wes Amidon from Jamaica who did this, who was a contractor on this project. Functioned really well. And so you can see that this part is done and it looks like pretty natural in a lot of ways. There's a lot of green plants here. What was cool is that behind this upstream sort of little dam that's kind of partially coming apart up here, there was a lot of sediment that had built up, wetland and water. So it's kind of like a little wetland system. There was a lot of wetland plants in there that they were able to just move with their excavators and just place over here, chunks of this material. And then I and Rodrigue, Jordan's colleague Rodrigue, who was on site most of the time with me, we were, had shovels, we were digging and sort of like setting those plants in, but really the contractors were critical in moving. And also they moved like these full-size alders and willows that were 10 or 15 feet high. And having the excavator on site to do that was able to just get like fully mature, really high quality plants, local, adapted to the site, and just like put them in there and basically plant them. And we had a fully restored site in like, literally this took like 20 minutes to put together. And it was, the power of these machines was so important for like just getting that done. We couldn't have done this like without that. So this was really great. And then that happened over here like the next day. So yeah, just thinking about like what kind of plants do we want to put out and how do we do it? I think obviously seeding, throwing down seed is classic technique. We use conservation mix, and this is the project in Colchester. This hillside was seeded with conservation mix. This is like where the dam actually was. And then where it's kind of more brown here and over here, we used a wetland seed mix from Vermont Wetland Plant Supply. The seed mix that's like super expensive and every seed feels like it's a little piece of gold that you're going to put down, so you have to be really careful. But it's a great mix, local. I actually got to visit Vermont Wetland Plant Supply this year and really see how Dan Redondo, who owns it, like runs that place. It's an incredible spot where he's just planting out tons of native wetland plants and aquatic plants, and he has an incredible like supply of that. He's at Orwell. Highly recommend like working with him, but also visiting if you haven't gotten to do that. Some of the species that are in that wetland plant mix that always do really well in projects, because I've used this on a bunch of projects, sensitive fern, blue vervain, foxtail sedge. These things are in that mix and they always just pop right up. And then you go back a couple weeks later and they're already there, which is really fun. And there's a lot of other stuff too, probably like 10 or 15 native wetland species that are in that mix. And then, Joe Pyeweed, this is actually a picture just from the Simpson Dam, like a plant that we just transplanted over. Sagittaria, native wetland plant that was on the site as well. So another thing that we do, like I talked about the excavators moving these giant chunks of plant material. So if that's there, I think it's just really wonderful to be able to just use it instead of saying, oh, this is a waste material that we have to like deal with. Like, let's try to plant it and put it in. Another thing that I have done is just like physically dug up plants that I know are going to be disturbed through the construction process and then putting them back afterward. So that's a way to just like use really high quality, good material that's like growing on site, probably going to do really well. Tree planting is another thing that we do. And so these are a couple of the common species. So willows, this is heartleaf willow. This is from the Simpson Dam. This is a speckled alder that was growing there. This is a red osier dogwood. So a bunch of these just native shrubs that I like to plant, whether you can like get them from the site, you can cut live stakes and plant them if you want to do that. Thanks, Julie. Live stakes or fascines, really any of these species, maybe not alder so much, but the willow and the dogwood, you could cut fascines and bury them, and then they will potentially grow, as well as providing the woody structure in the ground. Another great way to just restore the site with plants. So those are like some really common native things. And when I think about wanting to restore a site so that beavers might want to come back, these are some favorite foods of beavers, especially willows. But they also love alder and dogwood and plenty of other things as well. But if there's good willows, I just think like, just get them in there. And then if beavers are coming in and they're cutting them later, that's great. That's actually like what we want in a lot of cases. Just another picture at Simpson with the excavator in process of planting some of those trees. And you can see that they're like chunks of these trees. They had a tiny bit of transplant shock, but they really did great. And then down below here, that restored stream while the process is still happening. And then tree planting, this is like the traditional like go to the nursery, buy the trees and plant them, dig a hole and put it in the ground. A little more labor intensive. Vermont Land Trust, we often do this with volunteers or community groups, or like a staff day or something, rather than having it be part of the contract. I'm not sure if folks often do this, but this is just something that we've often kind of just done on our own for dam removal projects. And then just finishing up with a couple pictures, with a picture each of these two projects that we've spent most of our time on today. So a year later at the Button Project in Colchester, really happy to just see like a lot of just really verdant green vegetation. Oh, I forgot to mention too that we will sometimes incorporate like vertical wood pieces stuck into the ground. These were just chunks of those trees that we had used to create the weirs, stick them in the ground to provide perches for animals. And just a little, like some shade and a little bit more diversity. But I really loved seeing this because when we came back a year later, you see this valley width, this like that 25 to 30 foot wide flat valley. The root wads are here, and then there's just random pieces of wood, the roughness, there's wetland plants growing in here, and then the stream is actually flowing in multiple channels just the way that you guys designed it. So it was working really well and really happy. There's a few micro adjustments that we make. I think that's probably always the case. Right upstream here is a culvert that we replaced as part of that project as well. But really happy with that a year later, and it's just continuing to recover. My vision here is that I go back here in 50 years or 30 years, and this is just like a giant alder and willow swamp, and there's beavers in there. That's like what I want to see. There's no chance that a beaver dam is going to threaten any kind of like house or infrastructure or anything like that. It's a perfect place for them to provide all of the ecological services that they provide. And then Simpson, this project just happened this summer, so we just went back in October. So this is where the excavators were planting all those plants. You come back in mid-October, the leaves are down, but it looks like a natural stream. It's got all this great structure in it. It's got all these plants. The leaves are on the ground. Really happy to just see how that's restoring to be a natural system. And the landowner here, his obviously house is right there, is just so happy he just emails me like pretty frequently to say, I love just like sitting on my porch and listening to a stream outside where I used to just see this kind of stagnant pond. So really fun to like restore that as a whole system with the dam removal and the crossing incorporated into it. So that is the end of our presentation. I'd love to hear like stories or thoughts or like ideas that folks have, as well as any questions that you have from us. Are there other things that you've done that we haven't talked about? Yeah.
Thinking about those root wads and where to get them from. I've worked on restoration projects in British Columbia, and the contractor would just get root wads from their other work and stockpile them for us and then dump them into the site and place them all around. And they didn't usually come with the whole stem attached, but it was a great way of getting a lot of material. And then I'm also wondering how you secure the cross valley wood structures.
Yeah, so with those, oftentimes we bury them back into the valleys. So they got to go at least, I think we spec 2 to 3 feet into the valleys, and then we, usually you only have some of it exposed, and then as you get closer to the valleys, the valley walls, we basically tuck larger boulders into them. We haven't been using any sort of metal or rebar or any kind of unnatural fastening systems. We've been trying to keep it as natural as we can for these systems. And kind of on top of that, like these few that we've been talking about don't have really high velocities associated with them. We've done, our hydraulic modeling to kind of estimate what we expect high velocities to be in large storm events. So usually the weight of them in combination with some large boulders kind of placed on and around them and tucked into them has done good so far. And for Button, at least, it's gotten through both Julys these past 2 years, and nothing's moved too much. So that's a good start, at least.
Yeah. But it's a great point about the stockpiling the stumps, because I know like in Vermont, a lot of farmers are like, they're clearing fields of stumps, and they have, sometimes they're paying to get rid of them. So we can use just a stump for like those pieces that Jordan was talking about, but we can definitely use them for the random roughness elements. So I'm interested in that, just as it's like a thing that's already there, maybe easier to transport. You just put them in the back of a dump truck or something, and then just move it more easily.
Allaire, you mentioned, most of these dam removals that you're working on are on private land. And so you're working with private landowners. And I was hoping you could touch on sort of what those discussions are like to get that landowner on board, particularly maybe the Simpson site where you can see how close that the home is to the river. Anything that you do to sort of ease concerns or get them on the same page and buy into the vision that you're selling.
Yeah, it's a great question, Remy, and it's important to, with private landowners, it's like they're part of the design process, and if they have things that they're interested in seeing, like we want to make sure that we help to make that happen. With Simpson, they had actually reached out to my colleague who, this was kind of before we were doing a lot of dam removals, who I think reached out to you, Karina, right? And then you reached out to me. So we kind of went back and forth, but we had a group that you convened at the site. And so it was a husband and wife who just wanted to remove the dam. So that was great. It was that's the kind of thing that I wanted. We really worked hard at VLT. Now we did a little video with Jeff. Valerie actually passed away during the time between the start and the project, which was really sad, but it was really her vision, and he was totally supportive of it as well and wanted to see it happen. So we made a video with him talking about why they had reached out to get the dam removed. And I'm hoping that that's just something that then people start to ask about. I want people to reach out to us if they own conserved land and have a dam and want to do that. So it's something that I just want to get more people to think about and ask. Button is interesting because of so we own the land, but it's with Gene Button, who it's a life estate. It's a little bit of a more complicated thing, but Gene is a longtime farmer, landowner, donated the land to VLT, still lives there and manages it. And he had some concerns, he wanted to see open water because of, I think, birds and bees that used it. He wanted to make sure there was a source for wildlife. So that was part of the thinking in creating those little ponds. That was for me, that was a really specific response to his desire to see some open water. So it's things like that. It's just making sure they're part of the design. We haven't worked yet with people who are not interested in doing the project. I would say Gene was kind of ambivalent about it, and the Simpsons were driving the project. But that's kind of our next frontier, is just outreach and spreading the word about dam removals and what you can end up with. Maybe you end up with a cool stream in your yard.
And I'll add to that, Remy, is one tool that we've used to kind of get the message across of what it would look like in the final conditions is also hydraulic modeling and showing inundation extents. Yeah. And how those change from existing to proposed, but also what the velocities look like from existing to proposed. In some of the kind of higher tech 2D modeling, you can really show, pretty user-friendly images that really show where the water is going to be, some flow vector arrows that are easily digestible to a layperson. Mm-hmm. And we've found those to help quite a bit just to kind of get across what we're trying to do. So.
Was fish passage a concern at Button?
It was not a concern, because of the size of the stream. We did find a couple little fish in the impoundment when we drained it, but I don't know how they got there because they would have had to jump up a 6-foot drop from a failed culvert.
Yeah, and just downstream was this weird stone drop, and it was steeper than fish would have.
No, he's asking about Button.
Oh, Button, sorry.
Yeah.
I'm wondering about temporary vegetative cover. So a lot of your restoration sites where it bare dirt right afterwards, and the number of times we've done that and then had a flood go through and just take either all your seed or your vegetation or rip your trees out that you just planted. Do you guys have recommendations for how you like to put temporary cover, or is there a good way to kind of get the site stable faster using whatever topsoil or compost or something?
Yeah, I mean it's a good question. With the Simpson project, we definitely delayed some of the seeding because there was some rain predicted, so we waited until after that happened. I mean, honestly, this planting of these mature plants and these chunks of wetland herbaceous vegetation happened the day that the valley was shaped. So it was amazing because it was just so stable, just immediately. And that was a great thing for that particular spot. There was an area of bare ground that we just put some straw mulch down. And Yeah, at Button, we seeded it as soon as we could. There wasn't rain in the forecast.
Yeah,
But
I think you're
yeah,
right.
they're-
Just like looking at the forecast and trying to be as smart as you can about it, because it's a lot of money if you were to just put down all your seed and mulch and then all of it washes away a week later. So, but you can't always control that, and it doesn't make sense to, it's a lot more expensive to put down rolled matting on a whole floodplain, and in most cases it's kind of unnecessary and creates a flatter surface than we want with all of the roughness and the kind of varying topography. So that's a good question, and luckily in all of our experiences we've been on the better side.
Yeah, we haven't had the July flood like right in the middle of a project like the one that was described.
Just to follow up sort of on the timing of restoration efforts, and for smaller systems like this, it might not be quite as prevalent, but for, a larger dam removal, you're having to do that work, during low flow conditions, usually in the middle of the summer, which is not ideal for planting, getting seed to start. So I'm curious if you have any methods or suggestions in order to like bridge that time between, hot, dry summer conditions and wanting to get that site established, as quickly as possible.
I mean, honestly, I share what you think too, but like, I think just do it. Like, do it at the time. Like, wait, look at the forecast. If there's going to be massive rain the next day, don't wait for a couple days. But I mean, this was early August, and we planted everything. We cut 1 million live stakes from a lot of these alders and willows. We stuck them in the ground. I mean, there's all this stuff that I've heard. It's like, well, you can only do live staking like before buds break and then spring. And I just do it all year, and they're doing great. I've been back. And so I just think it's like, just get it done. If you cut the stake and then you immediately stick it in the ground where, there's a decent water table, it's going to have access to that water, and it's going to have a couple months left of the season. And like, it's like my worst joke ever, but it's like a low stakes restoration technique, live staking, because it's like, it's really cheap and it's really quick and you just put them in the ground. And so even if a bunch of them fail, that's a little bit of woody structure, and the ones that take, they take. So I think, it's just doing it. We waited, we wanted to do the tree planting on this site. There was some tree planting up on like this terrace and over here too. We waited till October just because of the availability of trees from the Intervale nursery where we bought the trees. So that was really driven by that. And it was a better time to do that planting. So we waited, and we spread the seed before that. So some seed had come up in the interim. But yeah, I think it's like, get some stuff established as soon as possible. Yeah.
And it's a funny question on like, when's the best time to do this work now, because our in-stream period of like June 1 to October 1 is, past few years have been very wet. So it's like, that is not, our dry period is not quite what we would have expected years ago.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of shifting, and I think there's some more leniency in when it could be done. Especially maybe earlier in the spring. If we have a drier spring, that's a good opportunity to get the work done if we don't have a lot of snow melt or anything like that. And then in terms of getting plants in the ground, I mean, fall is the best time, it seems like it, but getting seed is also, the longer that seed has to germinate and actually take root, the better it'll be come spring. So one of the UVM site that I was on, we seeded that in late October, and that came up a little bit, but it will still be a little vulnerable come spring. Mm-hmm. So ideally that would have been earlier in the year, but the flood happened and kicked the whole schedule back months. So timing's a little tough on getting not only like the site looking good, but getting it stable so it can withstand the next storm. Yeah.
There's time for one more quick question.
Okay, can I just add to that really quick? Worth noting too that the manner in which you constructed this project aids itself to some strategic stabilization, because there are portions of that site that were probably already growing by the time the last bit of seed went down. Because if you did it in segments and stabilize, downstream river right first, that was probably already growing and stable before you got to upstream river left.
Yeah, that's a good
So
point.
having portions can be helpful.
Good
Yeah,
point.
I thought that was a brilliant like decision of how they broke out that project. Yeah, it worked really well.
Okay. I was just going to ask, do you usually include like watering in your contract for the contractor, or do you try to do like a separate contract? And same with like planting. Do you try to do it all with one contractor, or try to split those?
Watering, like, do you want?
Watering the plants?
Oh, watering the plants. Oh, no, so the planting was we just VLT staff just did the plants in this case. Yeah, we haven't had watering as a separate part of a contract.
It's an interesting question though, because that, you know, especially when you have a dry summer or a dry period, the contractor might not want to come back just to water plants.
Yeah.
So if you have a willing landowner, that's great. Or if you're like
Depends on the size too. Like this was a small site, but if you had like some of the sites we've heard about today are just acres and acres of plants, and they do need to just get watered more.
Floodplains and former impoundments are great because oftentimes they're wet and kind of turn into nice wetland systems quickly, and they're sloppy, and you don't need to water them. So that helps.
All right, one more round of applause.